This is a Life in the 1800s newspaper special. This video contains the best 1800s newspaper articles. A compilation just for you. They are from Walla, Washington, from the Garden City Gazette, later to be called the Walla Gazette. I hope you enjoy it. The Wife's Season. The story is told of a young Boston woman, hardly more than a bride, whose husband did not come home one night, but he did the next morning, and stammering apologies about businessman from the West and other such matters that had nothing to do with it, to his great surprise and intense relief, she accepted his explanations sweetly, unquestioningly. Another night fell. Anxious to make further amends for his tardiness, he came home fairly early that day, expecting to be met with the usual sweet smile of his wife. But the sweet smile was not there, neither was the wife, or any word of explanation, nor did she return. An awful night of it that man spent, and when the little lady returned the next morning, he was ready to heap scorn and anything else handy upon her apologetic head. But she didn't apologize, not she. Sweetly she bade him good morning, went about her usual duties amiably, but vouchsafed not the slightest explanation. The man went off by himself and thought for a while. When he came back in an hour, he was a changed man. He told her so, said she did perfectly right and he was a brute. Then they made up in the good old-fashioned way. He said it should never happen again, and it hasn't. That man is just as proud as he can of his bright wife. The novel Revenge of a Rejected Chicago Suitor. Chicago, October 11th. J.P. Jacobson's suit for her heart and hand was rejected by Mrs. Johanna Baseman, a widow, Friday night. Saturday morning, a band marched up in front of Mrs. Baseman's home. Then the notes of Sweet Marie began floating through the neighborhood. The band played Whose Girl Are You?, followed with Kiss and Let's Make Up Again, and enough more to keep the band busy for 12 hours. Mrs. Baseman begged the leader to leave, but he said no. He said that Mr. Jacobson had paid handsomely for the music, and the contract must be carried out. The whole neighborhood gathered about the band. The children danced and the parents giggled. Mrs. Baseman was wild. At 9 p.m. the band quit. Yesterday morning, the band again marched up to the widow's home and began the repertoire all over again. Mrs. Baseman hurriedly consulted a lawyer, with the result that a warrant was sworn out for Jacobson. An injunction was secured against the band. A teacher and a gun. Charles Howard has an exciting experience near Milton. A good story comes from the east end of Umatilla County, in which unruly schoolboys, a determined teacher, and a gun play their parts. As one of the dramatis personae is a young man who is pretty well known in Walla County, Charles Howard, a brother of Reverend M.V. Howard. The incident will be regarded as of news of interest to the readers of the Gazette. Further than that, it serves as an illustration of our frontier life. There is, beyond Milton, a school district which has been the terror of all teachers who have contracted to teach there, and in nearly every instance in the past, the master has been mastered by the pupils, and has been compelled to close his books, sometimes making a hurried exit as he left for more peaceful parts. Among the pupils are several boys who are about ready to sprout mustaches and who brook no control over their playful propensities. Certain boys have been supposed to carry pistols. The big boys were on this particular day unusually unruly, and they had decided that it was time to do up the stranger who had presumed to tell them what to do in the schoolroom. Charles Howard was the font of authority, and he was drawing pay as their teacher. He had agreed to furnish his time and skill as an educator, but kindly threw in a good quality of nerve, making no extra charge. There was this boy who wouldn't obey. "You may come forward, sir," said the teacher. Winking at his chums, the boy advanced to the teacher's desk, and that individual, the teacher, not the desk, stepped down from the platform with the proverbial rod in his hand, having determined not to spoil the child by sparing the rawhide. He was about to strike the pupil when 5 other stalwart young fellows bounded forward. Just as they were about to lay hands on Mr. Howard, he backed into the corner and deftly drew from his pocket a pistol. It was an argument the young fellows could understand. With the pistol in one hand and the whip in the other, the teacher administered the punishment. It was a good orthodox thumping. The boy will remember it, and the others will hesitate before interfering again with a teacher who carries a gun. East Oregon. How dear to my heart is cash on subscription when generous subscribers present it to view. But the man who won't pay will refrain from description, for perhaps, gentle reader, this man might be you. Young America in Chicago. Of all the queer ways of making a living, 2 Chicago boys have the queerest. It is so queer that it smacks of swindling. A well-dressed little man at the Randolph Street corner of 5th Avenue stopped for a moment to allow a car to pass. While he was standing there, a boy edged up behind him and hooked onto his coat tail a card which was printed in black letters, "Sold." As the man went across the street, several persons saw it and turned to laugh at him. The second boy was waiting across the street. He ran up to the man and said, "Mister, there's a card hooked to your coat behind. Let me take it off." "Goodness me," said the little man. "How did that get there?" "One of them tough kids put it on, I guess." "Confound them! Well, here, boy, here's a dime for you." "Tanks, mister." 2 minutes later, a good little boy hung it on another man, and his partner on the other side of the street intercepted the man and collected a nickel. He had to ask for it, but he got it. A man would be a brute to refuse a nickel to a poor boy who has just done him a great service. Made him jealous. A married lady confided in a Gazette reporter how she got the best of her husband the other evening. When he came home late, as was his custom, and rang the doorbell, his wife went to the door and whispered softly through the keyhole, "Is that you, Willie?" Her husband's name, of course, is not Willie, and now he stays at home every night and sleeps with one eye open and a cannon under his pillow. Boyer Allen's farm. I remember well the first time I met John B. Allen. I had been hunting one summer day on the Russell farm and had a fair success in killing prairie chickens. I returned to Walla through the fields, crossing the Yellow Hawk at Seabers, skirting Chew's young orchard. I thought to shorten my route by cutting across the tract of Lawyer Allen. Following up a spring branch on the premises, I came to a pond or reservoir, around which I wished to pass. As I stood admiring some fine trout darting here and there in the pure clear water of the reservoir, My attention was attracted by the thump, thump, thump of a ram nearby. I concluded this was the head of the water system, which supplied the house and lawn. Powerful springs these must be, as they preserve the verdure of about 5 acres of grass and flowers. The second conclusion I reached was that the distribution of the water must be most excellent, for it had been applied evenly. Revolving sprinklers were set in several places and threw out streams of silvery spray. A large 2-story house rose in the center of the property. It was painted a modest color, and though plain in architecture, it was one of the handsomest in the Walla Valley. Stables and corrals inhabited by fine-blooded horses and cattle were in sight. A fine spring wagon in front of the barn was being washed by a boy with a hose. I wondered what could give such force to the stream which flowed from the nozzle. All about me were young fruit trees. Within 20 steps was a Royal Anne cherry, weighed down with its beautiful fruit. I confess now that I was tempted to pass under that tree and help myself to a cluster of those blushing beauties. Just at this moment, my reflections were interrupted by a voice. "How do you do, young man? You seem to be something of a sportsman." I followed the direction of the voice. There beneath the embankment was a man covered with mud and water. He was holding a brace and bit and had evidently been fitting an overflow pipe. The person who addressed me was properly clad for his occupation, and I supposed that he was the lawyer's hired man. "How are your father and mother these days? Are they spending the summer at home?" Now I was surprised that Lawyer Allen's hired man would ask about my father and mother. However, I answered his questions. I wanted some information myself. So I said, "As much as I've heard about Mr. Allen and his ability as a lawyer and orator, I have never seen him." "Or maybe you've seen him and not known it," said the man, as he bored away at a plank in the dam. "He isn't in Walla much, is he?" "Yes, he's here always, except when away attending court." "Strange, I haven't seen him on the streets." "Mr. Allen isn't on the street much. He comes out home as soon as he leaves his office in the city." "Say, as Mr. Allen is a lawyer and don't understand farming and gardening, I presume you do about as you please." At this, my new acquaintance smiled more broadly than ever as he answered, "No, Mr. Allen is the most exacting man I ever work for. He is never satisfied with what I do, and I never accomplish enough to suit him." "Why the deuce don't you quit him and work for someone else?" "I can't do that very well. He owns me." "Owns you? You are not his slave." "Can't you run away?" "No, Mr. Allen would run with me." I said good day to the man with the brace and bit, feeling that I had either learned something new or that I had been braced and bit. While at home, I dined upon the fried breasts of those prairie chickens that evening. I related the story of my conversation with Lawyer Allen's slave. My father asked me a few questions about the appearance of the man, and then after a hearty laugh said, "That was Mr. Allen you were talking to, Willie." An Indian chief who is worth $500,000. Special dispatch to the Cincinnati Enquirer. At Fishhook Bend, a place on the Snake River in the state of Washington, resides one of the wealthiest Indians in America, Wolf, chief of the Palouse tribe of the Snake Indians. Wolf owns 260 acres of land and is calculated to be worth nearly, if not quite, $500,000. His land is all under cultivation, and he has upon it good buildings, house and barn, the house well furnished and the barns well stocked. Wolf has made his money principally in raising horses, although he has a placer gold mine on his place, which he had worked to a considerable extent, and which has panned out considerable pay dirt. He has at the present time nearly 3,000 head of horses, and has shipped within the past 5 years fully 6,000 head to market. Wolf is 50 years of age, but does not look over 30, and has a most magnificent physique, which his pale-faced neighbors all envy. His Royal Highness is a great dandy. He dresses both in Indian and civilized costume, but prefers the Indian style. He generally wears a red woolen blanket thrown carelessly but artistically over one shoulder to allow the display of a gaudy calico or white shirt, but very low in the neck to allow the display in turn of a necklace made up of many-colored beads, bear's teeth, bright-colored shells, and beans. His fingers are generally covered with costly rings, while on his third finger he wears a magnificent seal. Elaborately beaded moccasins cover his feet, while his hair is banged a la Modoc and combed pompadour. His long black hair is braided in many strands with bright-colored ribbons and silk cords. Wears a plug hat on state occasions, but generally goes bareheaded and with his braided scalp locks struck full of wild turkey and grouse feathers. Other times he wears the rim of an old derby hat decorated round about with coyote tails. Upon his wrists he always wears a large number of bracelets made of brass wire. Wolf likes to do things up in style and has therefore a fine stable of carriage horses, and when he drives into Pasco, he does so with a coachman on the box of a genuine Brewster Baroque. He always puts up his horses at a livery stable and is very careful to specify that they shall be fed with the best hay. The old chief is a public-spirited citizen, and becoming tired of ferrying across the Snake River when he wanted to drive to Walla Walla, he has, it is said, erected a fine wire suspension bridge at his own expense. He now drives over the bridge into the city of Walla Walla in his own carriages. Wolf was formerly a great horseback rider, but lately he has taken to riding in a carriage altogether. In spite of the fact that he has a comfortable house, well furnished, he has his teepee in the yard, and sleeps wherein, no matter how inclement the weather. Girls' daring feat. There are not many girls who would dare leap from a yacht under sail in mid-ocean, or, what was practically the same, to a rocking bell buoy anchored 5 miles from shore. But this was the daring feat performed by Miss Laura Warwick, a maiden not yet 29 years old and a pretty girl. She is not a very large girl, but she has spirit, and when, in a tone of banter, William Westcott, a member of the Corinthian fleet of Atlantic, with whom she was out sailing, dared her, she mounted the prow of the boat, and as it went gliding by the big buoy, which was moving in unison with the rise and fall of the sea, she leapt upon the moving platform. It was a daring act. While she clung to the buoy, rocking like a cradle, her companion put away, and when at a sufficient distance, he produced his camera and snapped it. The photograph has only had a limited circulation among her immediate friends, but wherever it was shown, it called forth but a single exclamation: "How did she dare do it?" The bell buoy is anchored at the mouth of the inlet 5 miles from land. There's not much to do in Walla Walla this time of year. For entertainment, we like to go out and watch the trains come in and out. Oh, watch out there. Did you know you can get the latest train schedules in the Garden City Gazette? This issue is February 2nd, 1895. Mrs. W. H. Harvey of Pullman, a daughter of the Honorable L. M. Ringer, was with her husband admitted to the bar by Judge Sullivan at Colfax last Tuesday. She underwent a rigid examination, both by the judge and a committee of lawyers. She is the first female to be admitted to practice law in this state. The people of Walla will be interested to know that Mrs. Harvey was Miss Lulu Ringer, a bright young lady who graduated from Whitman College a few years ago. Social observations. W. H. Winfield is in the city from California. Jacob Betts arrived this morning from Olympia. H. C. Willis of Blaylock, Oregon, is with us to stay. Tabitha Giles and Harley Thornton of the Pataha Flats are spending a couple weeks in Walla Walla on pleasure bent. Henry Kelling, our popular city clerk and famous statistician, is confined to his residence with a throat complaint. The Reverend Dr. V. Marshall Law. The Spokesman Review has ventilated partly to the unsettled condition of affairs of St. Paul's Parish in this city. Dr. Law is the pivot between the two factions, which condemn and uphold him. It is unfortunate that such should be the status of the church that has been so prominently in the town's history. There is no doubt that Dr. Law is mostly to blame for the uprising owing to his personality in the pulpit. While unjust things may have been said against him, it is generally thought that he has been out of place in dragging innocent people into his sermons. He should have remembered, too, that other people have feelings as well as himself. But as Dr. Law is gone, let the matter drop and the sore be healed in the best and quickest possible way. He scooped the papers. The remarkable ride of Frank GROUARD, Chief of Government Scouts. The frequency in which road and racing records have been made and broken of late reminds the Western stock breeder of a remarkable exploit once performed by Frank GROUARD, Chief of Scouts. When 19 years of age, Frank was captured by Sitting Bull's band of hostile Indians and kept a prisoner with the savages for 5 years and 9 months, during which time he was forced to enter into all the customs. Being born on one of the islands in the South Pacific Ocean, he inherited the bronzed complexion so peculiar to people of tropical climates. Sitting Bull, contrary to the opposition of the head counselors of the Sioux Nation, adopted him as his brother, gave him the name of Standing Bear, and protected him against the plots of the Sioux to murder him. In 1875, just at the breaking out of what was known to the frontier history as the Sioux War, GROUARD made his escape from the Indians and found his way to the Red Cloud Agency, then situated about 1 mile from where Fort Robinson, Nebraska, is now located. General George Crook, the most successful campaigner against the Indians, took GROUARD into the government service, and afterward, in speaking of him, said, "I would sooner lose 1/3 of my command than Frank GROUARD." It was during his service with Crook as Chief of Scouts that GROUARD made the phenomenal ride of 101 miles in 4 hours and 10 minutes. During the earliest part of the 1876 campaign, the newspaper correspondent had repeatedly beaten out or scooped the government on news. After the Battle of Slim Buttes, General Crook gave GROUARD the official dispatches with instructions to get them to the nearest telegraph station ahead of any newspaper reporters, regardless of the expense. The command was camped on Willow Creek. In the morning, GROUARD set out early for Deadwood, and on riding up to Livery Barn, was astonished to find the government mule, in which the newspaper scout had been riding, hitched there. Upon inquiry, he discovered that the newspaper scout had hired the best horse in the barn at Deadwood and hit the trail for Custer City, 101 miles distant. It was then 10:30 in the forenoon. GROUARD jumped upon the fastest horse he could secure and started to overhaul the newspaper reporter. At the end of 25 miles, the first horse fell dead. Securing another, he started off again, and in making the remaining distance, changed animals 6 times, killing 3 of the horses. He overtook the other scout some distance from Custer City, reaching the latter place at 2:40 p.m., 4 hours and 10 minutes from the time of starting. GROUARD had to be lifted from the saddle and was unable to get out of bed for 3 days thereafter. The nearest telegraph station was Fort Laramie, and he secured couriers to take on the official dispatches at once and beat out the scout, who tried to outride him by 3 days. Few men could have made that ride under the most favorable circumstances, for it resolved itself into a feat of physical endurance. But the record of it is preserved in the government archives and is easily proved. The trip cost the government something over $500, but the news of the Battle of Slim Buttes was known all over the United States before the newspaper specials made their appearance, and the War Department officials were perfectly satisfied. Spring Valley Springings. John Ferris is still after that wheat. A. Murphy knows the path he helped to make. Fred Miller has been doing Walla Walla this week. Mrs. Wallace was visiting friends in the valley last week. Ed Miller has a sled that can outrun any team in his stables. Charles Ellis is looking for the would-be hunter who shot his bird dog. Blue Creek Pebbles. The pebbles that come to view in the sands of time as they flow through the Blue Creek hourglass will be exhibited in the Gazette hereafter. Reverend Leacorn and Mr. Warren are conducting revival services at the Mill Creek Schoolhouse. They are meeting with the reward of interest and several conversions. A number of the young folks of this community are sick, none serious. R. Griffith, the man who was kicked by a horse some time since, is improving. He attributes his rescue to Dr. Kropp. Additions to the pen. The population of the penitentiary was increased Tuesday evening by the arrival of 2 convicts from Spokane. Thompson, one of the men brought in, was an escaped convict who was serving a 2-year sentence from Spokane County. The other criminal brought in with Thompson is Jed Barber, who was sentenced to 3 years for cattle stealing. Had a bullet in his head. Colonel Sidney G. Cook, local manager of the Western Branch of the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers at Leavenworth, probably is the only man in the world who ever sneezed a bullet out of his head. Colonel Cook was badly wounded at the Battle of the Wilderness, a ball from a Confederate rifle having penetrated his brain. The night was very dark, and a lone Confederate named Charles N. Jones skulked about the field. He stumbled over Cook in the bushes, and a rifle still grasped in the apparently dead soldier's hand attracted his attention. He stooped to appropriate the weapon for himself, when Cook groaned. Jones had a few drops of whiskey in his flask, which he forced into the wounded man's mouth, and he revived. He was a powerful fellow and succeeded in carrying Cook into his own camp, a prisoner. His wound was dressed and he improved rapidly, with the bullet remaining in his head. After about 3 weeks, he was sent to Andersonville. He became strong, that is, as strong as it was possible for a man to become at Andersonville. One day he commenced to sneeze, and he nearly sneezed himself to death. He sneezed for 10 days. With the last sneeze came the bullet. It had been in his head nearly 8 months. Colonel Cook carries the bullet as a war relic. Jones is now a prosperous lawyer in Greensboro, North Carolina, and he and Cook are very good friends, as they should be.